a new battlefield. Digitalization, a luxury for the few.
Tomorrow's digital world, everybody, is our last session. So basically, what we want to do is try to understand to what extent digitalization can be an opportunity for all, but also what are the risks regarding digital transition in terms of inequalities, so opportunities and risks. And I would like to start immediately with Professor Marc Mezzar, professor at the Bocconi University. Professor, thank you very much for being with us. And I would like to talk about AI in particular with you, which is entering now the classrooms. Okay, so what is the potential of this, and to what extent it is a game changer in terms of education?
Well, artificial intelligence is at the same time both a threat and an opportunity. That is true for AI at large, and it's also true in terms of education. That's why the situation is so tricky. Everything will depend on the way it will be used or misused. Maybe I can illustrate it starting with the opportunities. AI can be used as an individual supervisor, a supervisor who offers the students a personalized training. For instance, it will include a choice of exercises, a choice that is tailored individually according to each student's level and educational goal. This is particularly true in hard science. If I think of the way we are training the student in computer science, I'm convinced that in the very near future, the way one teaches programming will be radically transformed. Furthermore, with the new developments in the large language models, this tutoring will rapidly become much more interactive. And I think this is a crucial step. In fact, cognitive studies strongly emphasize the importance of interactivity for learning. In order to maximize one's learning experience, one needs to be active. And a good AI tutor who supervises, who guides the students patiently, selecting the right exercises, suggesting the appropriate readings, that can be an extremely useful coach, a coach that can help the student learn at one's own pace. Now, if I look at the other side of the coin and the negative side, probably the first obvious threat that comes to mind is what I sometimes call the lazy use of AI. You remember, as soon as the first generative language models were out a few months ago, we were reading stories of students who have asked AI to write their essay or to solve the exercise that was assigned by the teacher. This is exactly the opposite of the beneficial attitude that I was mentioning before. Instead of using AI to become an active learner, the student now becomes completely passive, relies on the AI assistance, and in the end does not learn.
Please complete.
In my opinion, the most urgent challenge today is to educate people about AI. We all should be aware of AI's capacities, and we should be provided with a kind of user's guide, so to speak. This is true for students in school, but it's also true for professionals who will have to use AI with little training and no experience. Let me give an example. If you do not know that ChatGPT is an algorithm that aims at generating a probable sequence of words, and by a probable sequence of words, I mean a sequence which has neither an intrinsic meaning nor logics, then you can get fooled rapidly. That is because we are influenced by our cognitive bias. We are social beings. And after reading a semantically correct sentence produced by AI, we tend to attribute it a meaning or an intention that it does not have. We might even tend to believe that it makes correct statements. And as many of us have experienced, this is not necessarily the case. If I ask ChatGPT about scientific research, it will invent, for instance, some scientific papers that never existed. So at present, generative language models are not reliable on the facts that they provide. They have not been trained for this, not yet. The situation will certainly evolve in the next years, but the students who interact with these new AI-based algorithms, they should be instructed of what they really can do.
And let me just take from this, because you're a professor at the Bocconi University, and probably there are some of your students together with hundreds of future leaders. I mean, if they asked you, what should I do to take full advantage of AI? What are the skills I need? How can I get prepared for a future in which I can really use AI also for my career, for my life prospects?
Well, I think it is clear that AI will have a big impact on the organization of work on the long term. This is a technological revolution which is very important. The main question is, on what timescale will this transformation occur? I do not believe in an instantaneous revolution. If you think about it, already 10 years ago, when AI got the first success in analyzing images, there were newspapers which were announcing the arrival of autonomous cars and trucks and the threats of millions of drivers losing their jobs. This did not happen. And obviously, the substitution will probably take place, but it will take much more time. And there are very important obstacles to letting AI make autonomous decisions. The first one is obvious. It is the gap of performance between what AI can do in an idealized world, for instance, when it analyzes images from a database on a computer, and what it can really do when it captures a real situation with noisy input from an embarked camera. That's very different. The second obstacle is much more fundamental. The spectacular success of training AI with machine learning is a success of statistics. It is not yet well understood theoretically, and we as theorists, we cannot give guarantees that it will behave correctly in all circumstances. Furthermore, AI-based decision cannot be explained in logical and deductive terms. And this is very problematic because people do need such explanation. As long as they are not available, it will be impossible to adopt AI-based decisions on a large scale. So in my opinion, the most probable scenario in the short term is that AI will not directly substitute jobs, but it will be used gradually, more and more, in order to increase the efficiency and productivity of workers. We will not let important decisions be made by AI in full autonomy, but we will use AI in order to assist us in analysis, in decision-making. You can find examples in many fields. If you think of the medical doctor, who can be helped by an algorithm providing a list of possible diagnoses, including maybe some diseases that are very rare that he was not aware of. You can think of the lawyer, who will have a much faster and more complete access to the past decisions. You can think of the assistant who should prepare some rather standard letter to a supplier who is late. You can think of a decision on a new advertisement campaign. Many examples. So I think that the questions that workers, companies, and therefore also students are now facing is how to implement and how to make the best possible use of AI-based assistance. The right training for students is to focus on their adaptability. They should know how to interact with AI-based programs, and they should be able to adapt to the new programs that will keep arriving on the market at an incredible pace. That is, if there is a message that we have learned from the AI revolution of the past 10 years, it is this incredible pace at which new inventions are happening. So education to AI is the key.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately, we have no time, so thank you for being with us. And now let me move, because Professor Mézard, you mentioned and you highlighted especially the opportunities of AI, the digital transition, but of course there are also some problems for some vulnerable groups. So I want to make a first question to Diego Piacentini, who is a former Commissioner for Digital Transformation of the Italian government, a former Senior Vice President of the International Consumer Business of Amazon. Mr. Piacentini, how to reconcile the digital shift in public services with the needs and skills of vulnerable groups, such as the elderly, for instance, which risk being progressively excluded from the benefits of digitalization? Please.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me with you, even if from remote. I would like to thank you, first of all, both Bocconi, ISPI, and the OECD for hosting this event. This kind of question has been going on, obviously, for several years. I would say that the meaning of the question has been declining in terms of a reason of existing, because of the progress to be made, also because it's the generational issues is solving itself. But specifically, and starting from the abstract, I would say that government and public administration, first of all, have the duty to serve all segments of population, which includes, elderly, disabled, people that do not have access to computer in general or to digital tools. And therefore, the government has the duty, unlike the private companies, to serve, have a multi-channel approach. Let's use this terminology to explain how to give access to everybody. In my opinion, though, the worst enemy of the vulnerable groups is not necessarily, it's not the digital shift, but it's still the existing complexity of the bureaucracy. It is still the fact that there are inefficient systems. It's still the fact that there are convoluted and hard to understand processes. I would say that digitization is actually a blessing, even for the elderly, because it should be making things easier. And going to even a higher level of granularity, let's think, for example, what kind of interaction do the elderly have with the public administration? And it's both easy to understand from an anecdotal standpoint. Everybody has elderly people in the family, but also confirmed by data. The most frequent relationship is with the welfare system, having, making sure that the pension get paid every month, and with the health system. Aging population, obviously there is a strong relation with the health system. And just to give you an example, since we're in Italy, Italy has one of the most advanced systems when it comes to technological integration between the expenses in a pharmacy and those expenses being tax deductible immediately. This is one of the best systems available. I've been working in digital transformation for the Italian governments, also other governments, and I can assure you this is one of the best. But this is an example where digitization also comes to an end. It comes to a help of the elderly people. It's an example where it takes a little time to be educated, but it gets there. So again, the point is digitization is a tailwind, it's not a headwind for the elderly. It's going to make it simpler. Now, we want the government, as I said, have a multi-channel approach, take care perhaps also of some training and education, but that's also the union with the private system to do the same. So keeping in mind that digitization has to be supported by simplification of processes, the two things are separated, but they do converge. I still believe that the best thing for the elderly is to make sure that the user interface of the services are as easy to use as it is to buy on Amazon or to watch Netflix. Thank you.
But in particular, what can the public sector do in empowering citizens, especially the youth, with this, in terms of skills and devices needed to use the web wisely and safely?
Clearly, the question is about safety, and is the environment, especially for the younger generation, the younger people, a safe environment? It's not about using the technology. Obviously, the younger people know how to use this technology, and they know it incredibly well. This is a very important topic, and I believe that there is only one answer to that, which is education, education, education. It needs to start from programs in school, even from kindergarten, that generate a level of awareness into navigating the web. When I used to go to school, in elementary school, we had a subject line, a topic, a class that was called Educazione Civica, civic education, which unfortunately was totally undervalued and was not considered an important class, but it should have. And civic education could be replaced with a very good analogy by technology education, web education, how to navigate education. Clearly, you need to train the trainer. So it starts from training the teaching population, the teachers population, that then obviously trains the youth and the family, because also it's a duty of the family. So that's one answer. The other one is regulate wisely. What does that mean? It means that obviously there need to be clear and simple rules around privacy, around content like hate, pornography, false information. This is something where the regulators needs to jump in, and it is jumping in, right? It took many, many years to create something like called GDPR. We should be thinking about also the regulation of the other kind of content, although you run into a very thin line between regulation and censorship. And that's where it's very hard, and it's the homework of groups of ethics, philosophers, scientists, policymakers to make those rules. But important, and that's why I use also the word wisely, because it's easy to excessively regulate, and we know especially from the Italian experience that regulation is often punishment-based. If you do something that is wrong, you need to go to jail or to pay a fine or something. My point is that punishment-based regulation is obviously needed for extreme cases, but it's not needed for the normal cases. That's where education and the nudging is much more important than punishment. And as I said, I would start from kindergarten, from elementary school. And I believe that's absolutely a must that has to be done. And it's a necessary action, responsibility of the government. And that's where also I see the merge between government and private sector in terms of the creation of security and safety tools, for example.
Thank you very much, Mr. Piacentini. So now we have the final panel that I invite on the stage, to the stage. Please, hi, welcome. Please, take your seat. The lady, as you wish. So, let me very briefly introduce our panelist, Jens Lundsgaard, Deputy Director of the Directorate for Science, Technology and Innovation of OECD, our host. Thank you very much for being with us. Rohinton Medora, Distinguished Fellow and former President of CG in Canada. Bharatang Mia, she's over there, sorry, across you. So Bharatang, she is the founder of Girl Hype Women Who Code in South Africa. Thank you very much for being with us. And Sharon Thorne, thank you for being with us this time in person, finally. She is chair of Deloitte Global Board of Directors. And last but not least, Grazia Calandra, Future Business Leader, Audit Senior Manager, Fondazione KPMG, Advisory Board Member. Thank you very much. So, let's start from Jens. Just let's try to understand what is the link between AI and sustainability, because for the AI to function, we need a huge computational capacity, which of course use energy. So what is the link?
Well, I'm very happy you asked the question, because if we don't get this link right, this sort of joint digital and green transition, if we don't get that right, what's it all worth if we don't have a planet left to live on? So I took the bus. Well, of course, I took the plane first to come here, but at least when I got out of the airport and I looked for a taxi, I decided to take the bus. And admittedly, at my age, students, I could not do that without picking out my iPhone and finding the way with a bit of help of artificial intelligence. So one of the links are that all these digital tools can help us do simple things, such as taking public transport more easily than without them. Also at a grander scale, a lot of the science that goes into understanding the way the world's climate evolves involves a lot of computation, AI models to model the planet's climate. And if we're going to do what they spoke about in the previous panel of moving to a lot of more renewable energy, solar, wind that's going up and down in terms of production, we'll need a very smart electricity grid that also requires computational power. The problem, of course, is that all of this consumes energy, as you said. And I think we can say there's kind of a scale. I mean, the worst is Bitcoin. I don't know if there are anybody out here holding Bitcoin, but if you do, you should not, if at the same time you want to say you care about the climate. Because mining something like Bitcoin is just very, very carbon intensive because of all the computations going into establishing the blockchain that underlies Bitcoin. Then you have other things like artificial intelligence, algorithms that need to be trained. They're not as bad as Bitcoin, but still they come with a higher carbon and water cooling footprint than other digital technologies. So what do we do about that? I mean, first of all, we need to get more renewable energy. I think that's a simple first. That's a very safe bet. But there are also things we can do within the way we construct digital systems. And going back to my trip with the bus, there's a talented physician who has looked at what happens if we just lowered the level of precision. Maybe it told me it would take 34 minutes to come from the airport to get here. Well, maybe it was 1 minute wrong. Would that be a problem for me? Not really. Now, it turns out if you do things like this, you can drastically reduce the power consumption going into making those necessary calculations. So there are things that talented young leaders can do to bring us on a better track here, because we need both. We need the green transition, we need the digital transition, we need them to go hand in hand.
And we probably need rules to do all this. Do you think we need a sort of a new Bretton rules for digitalization? Because we need common rules, to make all this. What do you think, Roy?
Short answer, yes. The longer answer is that whenever we use a historical analog, be it Bretton Woods or San Francisco or anything else, one shouldn't get too hung up on exactly what happened in Bretton Woods. The point is to say we don't currently have the right architecture to mediate the kinds of issues Jens and others have talked about. We don't have the right institutions, as we didn't in 1944. And at that time, not the world, but the winners of the war and a few other countries got together and chose as the theme that prosperity, economic cooperation and cohesion, and peace go hand in hand. And that's what gave us the family of institutions and a system of governance that has served us well for 4 or 5 decades. The current sets of issues we see, and I'm sort of thinking back to COVID, Antonio, as having given them prominence. It wasn't as if COVID created them, they were underlying. But we realized how ubiquitous digital technologies were for good and for not so good. And suddenly we realized that the nature of digital technologies is that we have no privacy, and that the security that goes with containing a pandemic goes hand in hand with tracking and extremely intrusive ways of pretending to do good. We also learned through the vaccine rollout situation that the innovation and especially dissemination regime we have for global public goods. A vaccine is good not because it's good for me, but when I vaccinate myself, everyone around me is good. That's the nature of green technologies. They're club goods. They're goods with so-called positive externalities. So we couldn't simply let the market create that situation. So I think there's things that have to be mediated that did not exist in the 1940s. What would this pseudo-Bretton Woods type process reveal? In my view, 3 things. One, I'd say revisit the Universal Declaration of Human Rights so that we give more teeth and prominence to privacy. Second, to make innovation more democratic and more decentralized in some ways. And third, perhaps, to think about how we can manage data the way we've managed economic flows of goods and services.
Thank you very much. Now I'm very glad to move to Mia Baratang. Mia, thank you for being virtually with us and for your beautiful smile. Just 20% of coders in sub-Saharan Africa are female. What are the main obstacles to women's greater participation in this sector, especially in Africa? Please.
Thank you for having me. You know, I just want to say that in Africa, and from my experience, there are many factors that contribute towards underrepresentation of women. And some of them were mentioned by the previous speaker in the other panel to say education. We need to start educating from primary school. And then one of the things that stand out most of the time is cultural and social barriers. There's a lot of, besides economic and educational constraints, there's lack of role models and support system. So if there's so many gender stereotypes and biases and stereotypes that really are carried towards Black women, and when you talk sub-Sahara, we're talking about majority of 50% of people being Black. And if the population is like that and there's so much stereotypes, it's already prioritizing the expectations of the traditional gender roles in the tech space, which are very masculine, male, and that already exclude females. So I think once we improve on the quality of education and give women more access to resources, it will improve access immediately and educate the parents, because they are the biggest part of making sure that the gender roles are stereotypically perpetuated. You find that girls don't have enough time to study. Women are still the main caretakers in home situation. And then promotions in the workplace is still a very difficult thing to achieve for a Black woman.
Thank you. So we are talking about gender balance, human rights related, of course, to digitalization, inequalities. And the risk is that, I mean, the world is divided into, you know, those who can really have the skills, the instruments, the tools, and those who have not. You come, of course, from the private sector. What is the contribution that the private sector to do in fighting the inequalities related to digitalization? Please.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, it's great to be back in person.
Yes.
And very inspiring to have met a number of the future global leaders. So thank you so much for that. And also a magical dinner last night. The pandemic, you know, led to the huge mass dependence on technology. And overnight, you know, we saw the global population transition, huge swathes of the global population transition from being in classrooms, in the office, most social interactions, to being in front of their computers at home. And, you know, the digital capabilities kept us connected and afloat. But these capabilities mean we're more plugged in than ever before, and we have the metaverse with digital realities. We have AI providing solutions for us to actually do our jobs for us. And having the ability to use and access technology has now become a critical way of being fully part of society and the economy. And there's no doubt that, you know, the divide between the haves and the have-nots has got starker than ever. Billions around the world do not have access to affordable digital connectivity and tools. And there are millions who are, you know, very concerned about the skills gap that is developing and the impact on their livelihoods and ability to work. And in Italy, for example, more than 20% of people do not access the internet on a regular basis, and a third of homes do not have fixed internet connectivity. And the barriers, you know, for this are lower incomes, the fact that more people are concerned about confidentiality and security, the sort of things that you referenced, though they don't have the sort of the motivation to get those skills. So the private sector has a critical role to play to increase participation and to expand affordable access and to provide those skills. So I think there are 3 areas that companies can make a difference. Firstly, they can collaborate to provide training and also to foster diversity, equity, and inclusion. And collaboration between businesses, social enterprises, and charities is really essential to provide digital skills and to support literacy. So Deloitte has set up an initiative called World Class, where we're committed to empowering 100 million people around the world by 2030 through access to education and skills, and particularly digital skills. And in Italy, Deloitte has been working with the University of Naples since 2017 to provide a digital skills training course focused at women and graduates to help bridge the digital gap. And in the education technology sector, there's a large telco in Kenya that has discounted its tech services to an education-based social enterprise to enable them to expand their services to a wider audience. The second area is that companies can facilitate innovative financing. I think the private sector has to lead the way on finding innovative solutions to finance digital equity. So public-private partnerships, looking at sourcing and procurement. And another example is where Deloitte has been working with SAP to look at sourcing and programs to basically try and fund not-for-profit organizations through a technology called GiveWith. Another example is that we can provide resources to young people. So we've given 7,000 computers in the UK to schools. We can also provide time. We have 450,000 people around the world. We encourage them to volunteer so they can do work, they can help train people up. And it's something that all of you as young, our global future leaders, can encourage those around you to help provide those skills. And then the other thing is to spread awareness. So I think companies can use their resources to really emphasize the importance of digital equity, write blogs, articles, get into the media, but also expand their relationships and reach. So coming to forums like this, really talking about the importance of digital inclusion for everybody is critical, and also influencing policies and regulation.
Thank you. Grazie. Now, coming to you, to use AI, we need a huge amount of data. So if you're a big company, in the financial sector, in other sectors, you can afford it. If you're a small, medium-sized enterprise, maybe not. So maybe this is creating us a problem of democracy among companies, depending on the size. What do you think?
Thank you for your question, and thank you for this huge opportunity for a huge organization behind this. Yes, from my perspective, that is basically an auditor and a consultant perspective, what we are seeing is that regulation is increasingly requiring companies to put models with different and complex parameters. So, for example, from 2019, IFRS accounting principles requires the implementation of complex model to estimate forward-looking information for the estimate of expected credit loss for banks. These are very complex models. I'm not even talking about the management reporting requirements for budgeting or forecasts. Also, changes across the industries are forcing banks to innovate in the sector, to transform digital transformation. And rising expectation on ESG topics is also forcing the companies to put ESG components, integrate them into their digital infrastructures. For sure, big companies have lots of money to invest in that. For sure, they have the ability to catch the moment, to know when to implement, what to implement, and have adequate resources in terms of people. But what we see is that at the same time, because of the size and because of their legacy, they are struggling to innovate, to change what's existing. On the other hand, mid-sized companies are agile, can adapt more quickly. And I want to just count this example. In Italy, we have this mid-sized bank, Banca Progetto. that has been the first one to obtain the authorization from Bank of Italy to completely outsource their infrastructure to Amazon Web Services. This has allowed them to being agile, of course, and to implement artificial intelligence capability. And one example is that now for them it takes only 15 minutes from 2 weeks that it took before to open a deposit account. I mean, 2 minutes. And this is impressive. So what I think is that for sure this mid-sized bank don't have enough resources. But what we can see for the future is the collaboration between big and little-sized and open innovation, banks collaborating in platforms, and this is already on the stage because you can Google, there is a wonderful experience with Green.me that has a vision on this, on sustainability field. And this, of course, requires also an open-minded leadership. Requires new managers that are able to create relationships between players.
Thank you very much. Now, the second round of questions, I start with you, Jens. I kindly ask you to be brief because we are running out of time. Jens, data trading, data protection. There is a strike. To be, we have to bridge this gap. How can we make it?
Well, that's not easy, but it's a long-standing discussion. I mean, if we go back at some of the first things we did at OECD on digital, back in the 1980s, there we had the OECD privacy guidelines. They are alive and well. They are as relevant as back then. And I think what we are going to see is really that this becomes more and more important. You also set it out as one of the 3 items for international governance structure. I think we need to discuss what do we mean by privacy, what's the kind of privacy we want. I was sitting in London during lockdown and making my mother's taxes. She was sitting in a nursing home in Denmark. I could do it because the Danish tax authorities already had the data from her bank, and I could sign with her digital ID. Well, that's privacy within the family, worked well. Then we have this big discussion about data for innovation. How much should we open up? I think you are speaking about something very important about the balance that small innovators, leaders, initiators, entrepreneurs starting here from Bocconi could actually start to innovate based on the data that are held by larger corporations. And finally, how should this structure shape up that you speak about? I think we are starting to see some progress. We had at the OECD Digital Ministerial in December an agreement about a tough issue, which is if you hold a data cloud in a server in another country, what do you really know about how the police, secret services of that country look into what's stored? Well, you might not trust it if it's in certain countries, but could we at least have a club of like-minded countries, Europe, North America, and so on, where we could sort of trust each other? Those kind of things I think we will see more of, and indeed at G7 this weekend in Hiroshima, I think there was an important step to say, let's collaborate on responsible AI, because once AI gets stronger and stronger, whoop, it will look into more aspects of our private lives. So I don't know if the Hiroshima summit delivered, but it's with you next time as Italy picks up the G7 mantle.
Next year.
So please.
Thank you. So, Rohinton, Ms. Storm mentioned the importance, of course, of the private sector, the role it can play in fighting inequalities in the digital transition. But what can states do? What are the public policies that we need to, of course, to go hand in hand with the intervention of the private sector?
On bridging the gap in digital? Or?
On bridging the gap, on inequality, in avoiding inequalities.
Yeah, look, I mean, all of you would remember 25 years ago, there were a set of global conferences, WSIS 1, WSIS 2, and at the time, I think the phrase digital divide was almost coined, and it was very much seen as an infrastructure and access to the internet thing. And rightly so. At that time, that was indeed the challenge, and as you pointed out, in many parts of the world still is. Interestingly, by the way, this is not a North versus South issue. There are pockets in rich countries where access to the internet is poor, and there are many, many parts of poor countries where access is almost ubiquitous. So I think there is an inequality problem, but let's not confuse that with a geographic and inter-country problem. But I do think we have to continue on that, in that vein. Two other quick thoughts on that. One, I think digital divide has to be also seen in its soft connotation, by which I mean digital literacy now has to be built in meaningful ways into school curricula, almost from the very start, so that we don't have a stream of kids who grow up and still feel like outsiders, even if they can afford the machine, and those that are more handy with it. And the third and final, and perhaps the more unconventional thought, is sometimes we confuse all of this with saying more support for STEM and the STEM sciences. I would make a plea, especially sitting here in this university, let's not forget the humanities. Most of you will have 6 or 7 careers in your world. You will be dealing with technologies that change much faster than my generation dealt with. What you need is agility. You need the ability to understand the world around you, understand different cultures. You need to be resilient. These are all the things that the humanities teach you, not simply, and don't get me wrong, I love STEM, but not just STEM. And so I hope we don't forget the humanistic side of education going forward.
Thank you very much. Bartang, you mentioned in your previous intervention that some of the gender stereotypes can be replicated in algorithms used by artificial intelligence systems. So what should governments do to avoid it?
I don't think African governments can do anything for that matter unless the G7 and the G20 really act on the AI policy regulations they are discussing. I saw one when I think 2 weeks ago, the G7 was discussing, and I think that's the only thing that's going to avoid it, because the powerhouses, all these big tech companies, okay, maybe I should go a step back. When a software engineer is coming up with a new innovation, they're not sitting and deciding on, oh, I'm going to be biased in my innovation. It's the data set that already exists, because the data set is still so biased because of lack of interaction on the internet of certain countries that don't have access to the internet. So the voice that's sitting there already is biased. So we can't blame the engineers, we can't blame corporates. We have to have more people contributing towards the data online, and have to make sure that, I hope G7 and the European countries, that policy that they are driving to make sure that AI does not grow faster than what we are expecting. Because at the moment, it's growing super fast. And it has nothing to do with us as I think it's all about, as long as it can analyze us faster than we can as human beings, the government will be too slow for it.
Thank you. So now, last question for Ms. Storn. Storn, the link between digitalization and decarbonization. Can you explain what is the link for you? How we can manage this link?
So I talked about, the critical importance of technology for all of us to participate effectively in society and the economy now. And, I think that digital equity and access to sustainable technology is going to be critical for the just transition and decarbonization. And there are a number of solutions that will demonstrate that. So if I think about digital solutions, lots of them, but to get to net zero requires incredible transformation of the global economy. And we're going to need to see synchronized, transformation of interconnected, interdependent industries and sectors across the whole world. A number of businesses are already well on the transformation journey. Some are just starting, some have not started. And quality data is going to be key to success, because it will enable businesses to set targets, to embed processes, but very importantly, to measure the effectiveness and efficiency of the targets they've set. And that collation, management, and interpretation of data is dependent on digitalization and automated information. So for example, Deloitte has something called the Green Light Solution, which is an AI platform for data management and analytics, and it helps our clients, empowers them as they go on their decarbonization journey to take the right actions. But these solutions assess progress, help to identify carbon emissions reduction, water and resource usage, land impact, waste products, etc. The green-collar workforce is going to be critical. The transformation is underpinned by the rise of a green-collar workforce. And those people are going to have access to training, they're going to be reskilled, so that they can adopt the appropriate automated technology to drive sustainability and improve efficiency in industry. And then if you think about our cities, they need to be much greener, smart infrastructure, transportation. And many cities are really working on this and improving digital connectivity. In Portugal, Cascais, 2016, set up an online system so that their citizens and tourists could book, manage, and pay for online services services for hiring bikes, sharing cars, electronic vehicle charging, etc. All of this done to help reduce costs, but importantly, carbon emissions. Telesales and remote working have really, the COVID pandemic basically made this normal, that we could, move online very seamlessly. Again, this has reduced emissions, overheads, and it's just become a normal way of working. And then the other critical area is transparency. So the huge amount of information that's available digitally now means it's much easier to hold companies and governments to account. And through social media, we can do the same. And you referenced ESG reporting. But that is going to be another way that we can hold companies to account. So lots of positives, I think, from digitalization to help decarbonization.
Thank you very much. But we have mentioned many times green and digitalization. I mean, green transition, digitalization, they should go hand in hand. So my last question now to Grazie. Are companies really changing, for instance, their reporting practice to account for those transformations?
Well, the transition from a company old style to a digital company focused on sustainability objectives requires the implementation of this kind of metrics. I completely agree, it's all about data. And in fact, in a recent research, Oracle observes that managers are reporting concerns about the availability of this data that are needed, the lack of data, and concerns on the way to grab data. In fact, we need to keep in mind that these systems need to manage various kind of data that varies across the three letters, the ESG, so environmental data, social and governance data. So you can have CO2 emissions, but also data about gender pay gap or the green asset ratio. This is basically a financial metric. So what I think about the question, yes, companies are organizing to develop their platforms, and no, I think that not more should be done, but I think that maybe it would have been better if less was being done on the regulation side, at least. Now we
regulate, but not so much.
Regulate, yes,
but not so much.
Yes. So many standard setter, international bodies, and rating agencies have put their words on the topic that now we are ending up having a regulation that requires more than 1,000 data points to be reported by companies. This is a huge amount. They are encompassing all kinds of standards, GRI, TCFD, EU taxonomy rules, just to name a few acronyms. This is too much, and I think that we also lost the opportunity to create a common playing field also among different jurisdiction legislations, because different principles have been set for EU, for the US, for international scope, and again, without taking into account the global south. So what I think is that we need a vision for the future, for sure. We need to integrate all this kind of reporting and to provide guidelines to implement all the set of information at the very end of the story.
So thank you very much. We have to close here. So let me thank Jens Lundsgaard, Rohinton Medora, Bharatang Nia. Thank you so much. Sharon Thorne again for being with us, and Grazia Calandria. Thank you so much. And now we move to the closing session, and let me invite Andrea Sironi, President of the Bocconi University, so home of this event, and Paolo Magri, the Executive Vice President of ISPI. Thank you.